My son put my suitcase on the porch in the rain. Not beside the door. Out past the overhang on the bottom step, where the water was coming off the gutter in a rope. An old brown suitcase with a broken zipper pull that my wife bought me in 1979, sitting in a puddle, with everything I owned in the world inside it. "The nursing home van comes in 1 hour," he said. He was standing in the doorway with his arms folded so he didn't have to get wet. "We need your room for the gym." That's what he said, word for word. I've turned that sentence over so many times since that it's worn smooth like a stone in a pocket. "We need your room for the gym, not we need the money, not we can't take care of you." A gym. A rack of weights and one of those mirrors and a rubber floor in the room where I had slept for 9 years, in the house that I paid for. And then the screen door banged, and my granddaughter came out. Winnie is 8 years old. She had come running from somewhere in the back of the house, and she was already crying, that ugly gulping cry a child does when they've been holding it in and it gets away from them. She ran out into the rain in her socks, and she grabbed my hand with both of hers, and my son reached down and took her by the arm and pulled her back, and he said, "Don't touch him, he's not staying. Don't touch him," like I was something on the side of the road. So I stood there, 74 years old, in a windbreaker that had stopped being waterproof around the time Obama was president, with rain running off my chin and into my collar, holding nothing, looking at a suitcase in a puddle. My granddaughter was screaming behind the storm door. My son had gone back inside to get out of the weather. And then my phone rang. It was in my jacket pocket. An old thing, a phone my son bought me and paid the bill on. It almost never rang. I got it out with wet hands, and I looked at the screen, and there was a name on it I did not recognize. But my son had come back to the doorway to say something else to me, and he saw the screen too. From 6 feet away, through the rain, he read that name. And I watched my son's face change. I have known that boy since the second he was born. I have watched his face do every single thing a face can do. I saw it when he broke his wrist, and when he got married, and when they put Winnie in his arms. And I have never seen it do what it did on that porch. It went slack. It went the color of the sky behind me. And he took 1 step backward into his own house like the doorway had grabbed him. He knew that name. I didn't. He'd been ignoring it for 3 weeks. I want to stop right here, because I know you've got 100 videos in that feed and something else you could be watching, and I'm an old man talking about rain. So let me be plain with you about what this is and what it isn't. This is not a story where I turn out to be secretly rich. I'm not. Nobody in this story finds out I own the company. There's no lawyer in a black car and no folder that changes everything. I didn't do anything that day. That's the part I need you to understand before we go any further. I did not fight him. I did not plan anything. I didn't have a card in my pocket. I stood in the rain in wet socks and I answered a telephone because it was ringing. And that phone call ended my son's entire life. Not because of anything I did to him, because of what he had already done for 8 years in the quiet while I said thank you. So here's all I'll ask. If you've ever been made small in your own home by somebody you raised, if you've ever been the one who said it's fine, don't make a fuss, then hit subscribe before we go on. Not for me. Do it so the next person like us finds this. Because I looked for a story like mine for 8 years and I never found one, and I want it sitting there waiting when somebody's father needs it. All right, come sit with me. Let me back all the way up. My name is Amos Barrow. I'm 74. I was a millwright for 39 years, which means I fix the machines that make the things you buy. Big machines. I was good at it. There is a particular kind of man who can walk up to a line that has been down for 6 hours, with the plant manager screaming, and put his hand flat on a housing and feel what's wrong through his palm. I was that man. Nobody ever wrote about me in a newspaper. 200 people fed their families off lines I kept, running. My wife's name was Estelle. We were married 42 years. She died in 2016 of an ordinary heart attack on an ordinary Tuesday in the kitchen while a chicken was in the oven. I came in from the garage and she was on the floor and the timer was still going. I will hear that timer for the rest of my life. We had 1 child, a son, Grady. I need to tell you about Grady honestly, and honestly means starting with what I did. Grady was not a bad boy, I want that said. He was a nervous boy, a boy who wanted very badly to be liked, and he was not good at the things I was good at. He couldn't fix anything. It embarrassed him. And instead of teaching him patiently, the way a father is supposed to, I did the thing that was faster, which was to take the wrench out of his hand and do it myself. Every time, for 18 years. I taught my son that he was a person things got done for, and then I was surprised, later, when that's who he turned out to be. Estelle handled him. She was soft where I was flat, and she loved him in a way that never asked him to be anything, and when she died, the string between him and me went with her. We didn't know how to talk. We had never once done it without her in the room. In 2017, a year after the funeral, Grady came to me with an idea. He said the house was killing me. And he wasn't wrong. I was rattling around in a 3-bedroom on Delmar Street with her clothes still in the closet, and I was 70 years old and not sleeping. He said, sell it. He and Delia had found a bigger place over in Kettering, a nice place with a room on the ground floor with its own bathroom, and I'd have my own space, and Winnie was just born, and we'd all be together. He said, Dad, don't die alone in Mom's house. That's the sentence. Don't die alone in Mom's house. I don't think he was even being cruel when he said it. I think he meant it, and I think it was also a crowbar, and both of those things can be true. So I sold the house. $214,000. Every cent of it went into the house in Kettering. It's not a loan, and it's not a gift. There was never a document because who asks his son for a document? He said, it's your house too, Dad. And I believed him because he was my son, and because I wanted to believe him, and those are not the same reason, but they feel identical from the inside. My name never went on the deed. I never asked why. So now you know the shape of it. The room they wanted for a gym was a room I bought. The house that put my suitcase on the porch was a house I bought. And when my son stood in that doorway and told me the van was coming, he was standing on a floor I paid for, telling me I had no right to be on it. He was correct, legally. That's the thing about it. He was completely correct. Now, the papers. In 2018, my heart went bad. Triple bypass. I was 66 and I woke up in a room in Miami Valley with a tube down my throat and a scar you could plow a field with. And for about 10 days, I was not a person. I was a body somebody was doing things to. And somewhere in those 10 days, or maybe the week after, when I was on the pills that make the room breathe, my son sat on the edge of my bed with a folder. It's just paperwork, Dad, insurance stuff, so I can talk to them for you. I signed it. I want to be very clear because people ask me this and there's a tone in their voice. Nobody held my hand and made me. I was not senile, I was tired, and I was scared, and my chest felt like a horse was standing on it, and my son said, let me handle it. And I have never in my life wanted anything as much as I wanted somebody to handle it. I signed a durable power of attorney. Financial and medical, both. Do you know what that is? I didn't. Not really. I thought it meant he could call the insurance company. What it actually means is that from that day forward, in the eyes of every bank and every agency and every doctor's office in the state of Ohio, my son could stand where I stand and speak with my mouth. He could move my money. He could sign my name. He could tell people what I could and could not do, and they would write it down and believe it. I handed him myself, in a hospital bed with a pen he brought. And here's the part I've had to make my peace with. He didn't steal it. I gave it to him. I gave it to him because I was afraid, and because I loved him, and because 39 years of being the man who fixes it had left me, with absolutely no idea how to be the man who needs it. For a while, it was fine. I want to say that too, because the way these things actually go is not the way they go in movies. Nobody turns into a monster on a Tuesday. It moves the way rust moves. First, he set up the direct deposits. My pension and my Social Security, a little over $2,700 a month, the whole of what 39 years came to, went into an account with his name on it. To pay my share of the bills, he said, which was fair, and I said so. Then he gave me an allowance. $200 a month in cash on the first, in an envelope on my dresser, for haircuts and coffee and whatever a man needs. I thanked him for it. I want you to hear that. Every single month for 7 years, I said thank you to my son for handing me $200 of my own money. Then the room got smaller. Not the room, the life in it. My car went first. He said the insurance had gotten stupid for my age, which is a thing people say and you don't check. Then the second key to the house went, because I'd lost one, once, in 2019. Then he moved my mail. He said it was getting mixed up with theirs. I didn't have a car, a key, or a letter with my name on it. And I never once fought about any of it, and I want to explain why. Because if you're young, you'll think I was weak, and if you're my age, you already know. Because every time I opened my mouth, I got the sigh. You know the sigh. And then, Dad, we're doing our best here. And then Delia would look at the ceiling. And then Winnie would come in, and I would rather have swallowed glass than have that child watch me argue with her father in her kitchen. So I said, it's fine, don't make a fuss. I said it for 8 years, and every time I said it, the room got a little smaller, and I got a little quieter, and my son learned a little more thoroughly that there was no bottom. Delia, I'll deal with plainly. My daughter-in-law's not a wicked woman. She is a tired woman who married a man she believed was going somewhere, and who found out he wasn't, and who decided somewhere along the way that the safest thing to do was to see nothing. She knew about the money. She could not possibly not have known. She never did one cruel thing to me in 9 years, and she never once said, "Grady, that's enough," and I have thought a great deal about which of those two facts is the important one. Here's how small I got. In 2023, I stopped going in the front door. I used the side door by the garage because the front hall went past the living room, and the living room was theirs, and if I came through it, Grady would pause the television. He wouldn't say anything. He'd just pause it and wait until I was gone. An old man in his own house, going around the outside so his son wouldn't have to pause the television. And then there was Winnie. I don't have the words for that child. I've tried. She's 8. She's got Estelle's chin, exactly Estelle's, which nobody else in that house can see because nobody else in that house looked at Estelle for 42 years. Winnie is the only person in 9 years who ever came into my room without a reason. She'd come in after supper and lie on her stomach on my floor and tell me the entire plot of something she'd watched. All of it. The whole thing. Wrong in places. And I'd lie back on the bed and say, no. He did not. And she'd say, he did, Papa. And that was the whole hour, and it was the best hour of my day for about 7 years. I taught her to solder, 8 years old. I had my old kit in a drawer, and I'd put a magnifier on it and let her tin a wire while I held her wrist, and she'd get that furious little wrinkle between her eyes. Grady found out and took the kit, said it was dangerous. It was dangerous. I'd have let her burn a fingertip and learn something. Once, she was 6, she asked me why I ate dinner in my room, and I said, because Papa likes the quiet. That was the biggest lie I ever told in my life. I've told her since. I sat her down when this was over and I said, Winnie, I lied to you about the dinners. And she said, I know, I always knew. 8 years old, children always know. Every single one of you watching who has a child in a house like that, the child knows. They can't say it, they don't have the words. But they know exactly who is small and who is doing the making small, and they are writing it down inside themselves. And one day they are going to read it back. Now, let me tell you about a dentist. In October of last year, I had a tooth going bad. Lower left, I told Grady twice, and got the sigh. So one Tuesday, I got up, and I walked 11 minutes to the stop on Wilmington Pike, and I rode the bus into the city, and I sat in a dentist's chair on 3rd Street, and I filled out the forms myself, and I paid the $60 out of 2 months of envelopes, and I rode the bus home. I was so proud of myself I almost told them. I decided not to. It felt like something that was mine. Now. 2 months before that, in the States file, my son had signed an assessment about me. It said, Amos Barrow could not walk unassisted. It said Amos Barrow could not manage transportation. It said Amos Barrow could not manage his own money, could not prepare a meal, could not reliably identify the day of the week, and required assistance with toileting and bathing. Total dependency. That's the term. It was in a form with my name on it, signed by my son under my power of attorney, and it was how he got me approved for a state waiver program for people who need full-time care in the home. And once I was approved, he enrolled himself. As my caregiver, paid. Now do you see it? The man they were paying to lift me in and out of a bathtub had a full-time job at a distribution center in Moraine, 45 hours a week, a second shift. He was billing the state of Ohio for 40 hours a week of care he was not in the building to give, for a man who did not need it and had never needed it, and who walked 11 minutes to a bus stop with a toothache because nobody would take him. A dental hygienist noticed. That's it. That's the whole thing. She had my chart, she saw a note about a home care waiver, and she watched a 74-year-old man walk himself in off 3rd Street in the rain, alone, do his own paperwork, count out $60 in fives, and walk himself back out to the bus. And she said to somebody, "That doesn't match." I've never met her. I don't know her name. Somebody at that office picked up a telephone in October, and that telephone call is why I am not, right now, in a room in a facility in Xenia being fed applesauce, with my son collecting my pension and my granddaughter growing up believing her papa got confused and had to go away. A hygienist, doing her job, somebody's daughter. Her name was Coralie Bishop, the woman on my phone. She's an investigator with the Medicaid Fraud Control Unit, which is a thing I did not know existed, and which exists in every state, and which handles exactly 2 kinds of case: people stealing from that program and people abusing or neglecting the patients that program pays for. I was both. I was one file with both boxes ticked. She opened it in January. It took her about 6 weeks to pull the timesheets my son had submitted and lay them next to the badge records from his employer in Moraine. That's not detective work, that's a spreadsheet. On one page, my son was bathing me and cooking for me and helping me to the toilet. On the other page, he was on a loading dock 9 miles away, clocked in for the exact same hours for 6.5 years, and in February she started calling him. She called him 17 times. She left messages, she sent a letter by certified mail, and he signed for it. And Delia told me later she watched him carry it out to the garage and put it under a bag of fertilizer. 17 calls in 3 weeks, and my son said nothing to me, and every night at supper he sat at that table and ate. Here's what I want you to sit with. During those 3 weeks, my son was not planning how to explain himself. He was doing arithmetic, because there was exactly one thing that could still save him, and it was for me to be a man with dementia. If I could not be interviewed, if I could not sit across from that woman and answer a question, then the forms were true. Then he wasn't a thief. He was a son with a hard, hard burden, drowning in it, who'd cut some corners on paperwork he barely understood. He needed me in a facility with a chart on the door before Coralie Bishop ever got to look at me. That's what the van was. That's what the gym was for. My son wasn't cruel to me because he'd stopped loving me. He was cruel to me because he was cornered, and I was the thing that could put him in prison, and the fastest way to make a witness disappear in this country is not a shovel. It's a signature and a bed. The facility didn't do anything wrong, by the way. People always want somebody to blame there. They had a signed power of attorney and a physician certification and an assessment saying I had severe cognitive impairment. Everything was in order. They were sending a van for a confused old man who couldn't be left alone. They were sending a van for a millwright who could rebuild a gearbox blindfolded and had walked to the dentist by himself in October. So now you know everything my son knew, standing in that doorway on the 14th of March, watching a name come up on my telephone. Let me take you back out into the rain. He'd told me the night before. Just told me, at the table, between bites, that they'd found a place, that it was really nice, that the van would come at 2. Delia looked at her plate. Winnie was at a friend's. I didn't sleep. I want to tell you I raged. I didn't. I lay in that bed with my hands folded on my chest like a dead man, and I thought, well, all right. I was 74. I had a suitcase, no car, no key, no mail, $200, and a son who wanted the room. I want every person my age who is watching this to hear the next sentence, because it is the truest thing in this story. I had decided to go. I was going to get in that van. I'd made my peace with it around 4 in the morning. I was not going to make Winnie watch her father fight her papa on the lawn. I had one thing left, which was that child's idea of me, and I was going to spend it on going quietly. That's what he was counting on. He knew me. He knew exactly what I'd do because I'd been showing him for 8 years. So at 1 o'clock I carried the suitcase to the front hall, and he took it out of my hand and carried it past the overhang and set it in the rain on the bottom step, and he did it in front of me, and I've thought about that more than anything else. There was no reason. It was raining. He could have left it inside the door for an hour. He put my suitcase in the rain because some part of him needed to see it there. And Winnie came out. She'd been told I was going on a trip. She'd figured it out on her own. I told you, children always know. And she came running out in her socks and grabbed my hand with both of hers, and she said, "Papa, don't. Papa, don't." And my son pulled her off my arm and said, "Don't touch him. He's not staying." And I looked at my son's face while he said it, and I did not see a monster. I saw a boy who could not fix a bicycle chain. I saw a man who had gotten to 45 years old without ever once, in his whole life, having to sit inside a consequence because his father kept taking the wrench out of his hand. That's mine. I made him. Whatever else I say tonight, that's mine. And then the phone rang. The screen said, Coralie Bishop. Just a name. Nothing else. It meant nothing to me. It could have been anybody, a wrong number, a woman selling gutters. And I looked up, and my son was looking at that screen, and everything went out of his face at once. I'd never seen it. Not once in 45 years. He took a step back over his own threshold, and he said, very fast, very quiet, "Dad, don't. Dad, give me the phone." And that right there, and not the suitcase and not the rain, and not what he said about my hand, is the moment I stopped being a man who was going to go quietly. Because he said, "Give me the phone," and he said it in the voice of a boy who has broken something. I answered it. I said, "This is Amos Barrow." And a woman said, "Mr. Barrow, my name is Coralie Bishop. I'm an investigator with the Ohio Attorney General's office, and I have been trying to reach your son for 3 weeks. I'm not calling about him. I'm calling about you. Sir, is this a good time to talk?" I stood in the rain. My son was coming down the steps toward me with his hand out, saying my name. And I said, "Ma'am, I'm standing in my son's yard in the rain, and my suitcase is on the step, and there's a van coming for me at 2 o'clock. She was quiet for about 1 second, and then her voice changed, and it got very flat and very slow, and she said, "Mr. Barrow, I want you to listen to me carefully. Do not get into that van. Do not sign anything. Are you safe where you are standing right now?" And I looked at my son, 45 years old, in the rain now, hand out saying, "Dad, Dad, hang up." And behind him at the storm door was my granddaughter with both palms flat on the glass. And I said, "No, ma'am, I don't believe I am. I'm going to tell you what happened next because it's the part I'd want if I were you. Nothing dramatic." She stayed on the phone with me, that's all. She said, "I'm 40 minutes out. I'm getting in the car now. Stay on the line with me. Don't go inside and don't get in any vehicle for any reason." And I stood on the lawn of a house I paid for, in the rain, on the telephone with a woman I'd never met, while my son stood 8 feet away and went through every single thing a man can go through in 40 minutes. Coralie Bishop asked me questions for a while, and I understand now she was doing 2 things at once. She was keeping me on the line, and she was building a record. She asked me my date of birth. She asked me what day it was, and the year, and who the governor was. She asked me to name my medications, and I named all 4, and the dosages, because I'd been taking them out of the bottle myself every morning for 8 years, while my son billed the state for handing them to me. Then she asked me a question that took the legs out from under me. She said, "Mr. Barrow, in the last 6 years, has anyone from the county or from a care agency come to that house to see you? Anyone at all? A nurse, a case manager, anyone?" And I stood in the rain, and I thought about it, hard, because I wanted to be accurate. And I said, "Ma'am, in 9 years, nobody has ever come to see me." She was quiet a second, and she said very gently, "Sir, they came 4 times. They'd come 4 times. 4 separate visits, over 6 years, from people whose job it was to lay eyes on me and confirm that I was being cared for. 4 times somebody drove out to Kenwick Drive to check on Amos Barrow, and 4 times my son met them at the door and told them I was sleeping. Signed the sheet, sent them away. Twice they wrote down that the client appeared frail and was resting. I was probably in the garage. I keep thinking that. I was probably 40 feet away with the radio on, tinning a wire, and there was a woman on the porch with a clipboard who had come specifically to find out whether I was all right. He shouted first. He told me I was confused. He said, "You don't know what you're doing, Dad. You're not well," which is the same sentence he'd been writing on state forms for 6 years, and hearing him say it out loud with his own mouth was the first time I understood the whole of it. Then he tried to take the phone. He got close enough that I could see he wasn't going to, and he stopped because Otis Rawlings had come out. Otis has lived across Kenwick Drive for 11 years. Retired, drives a Buick, waves. That's the whole of our friendship. He'd come out on his porch because a little girl was screaming, and he stood there in the rain and looked at it, the suitcase, the old man, the son with his hand out, and he went back inside. And he came out again with an umbrella. He walked across the street 70-some years old in the rain, and he stood next to me and held that umbrella over my head, and he never said one word to me the entire time. He looked at Grady. Not angry, just looked at him, the way you look at a thing you're memorizing. Grady went in the house. Otis Rawlings stood in the rain and held an umbrella over a man he'd never had a conversation with for 38 minutes, until a state car came up Kenwick Drive. He gave a statement 3 weeks later. It's 4 pages long. He noticed things I didn't he'd been noticing for years. I've spent 4 months thinking about the 2 people who saved my life. A hygienist whose name I don't know, and a neighbor who waved at me for 11 years. Neither of them did anything heroic. They just declined, at the necessary moment, to mind their own business. The van did come. 2 o'clock, right on time. By then there was a state car and a sheriff's cruiser and a woman from Adult Protective Services in my son's driveway. The driver looked at all of it. He looked at me, soaking wet, standing up straight, giving my name and my date of birth and the name of the ship my father served on, because Corley Bishop had asked me a series of questions in a very kind voice, and I had answered every one. And he said, "Sir, are you Amos Barrow?" And I said, "I am. I'm not going with you. Thank you for coming out in this." And that man, God bless him, he said, "Yes, sir, that's all I need." And he got back in the van and he drove away. And he called his admissions office from the road, and that call is in the file too. It takes one person, that's all it ever takes. One person who declines. I asked Corley Bishop something later in an office with bad coffee. I asked her how many of these she works, and she looked at me for a second, deciding whether to tell an old man the truth, and then she told me. She said her unit can only take the ones with paper, money moving, a billing trail. She said the ones without paper, the sons who just make their fathers small and take the mail and pause the television. Those aren't crimes, and there's no file to open, and there's nothing she can do. She said, "Mr. Barrow, the only reason I ever found you is that he got greedy enough to write it down. That's kept me up more than anything my son ever said to me. If Grady had simply taken my pension and left the state out of it, if he'd just quietly emptied me and put me in a room, there would have been no spreadsheet, no hygienist, no telephone. I'd be in Xenia right now. And every one of you would agree that my son had done his best with a difficult situation. I'll go through the rest quickly, because the rain is the story and the rest is just paper. That afternoon, a physician sat with me for 2 hours, not a specialist, an ordinary doctor with a clipboard. And at the end of it he wrote that Amos Barrow was fully oriented, fully capable, and possessed complete capacity to manage his own affairs, and had, in the examiner's judgment, possessed it continuously. 6 years of forms said I couldn't tell you what day it was. It took a stranger 2 hours to establish that this was not true, and had never been true, and the only reason nobody had ever checked is that nobody had ever asked me. Not once. Everybody talked to my son. Everybody talked over me in rooms I was sitting in. The power of attorney was revoked that week. Turns out a competent adult can tear one up any time he likes. I had been able to do it for 8 years. I never knew, and my son never mentioned it, and there is a whole industry of quiet that lives inside that gap. The placement was void. It had never been lawful. A power of attorney does not let a man put his father in a facility against his will. That requires a guardianship, and a guardianship requires a judge, and a judge would have looked at me. That's why he never went to a judge. Here is the number, since you're wondering. The indictment said $491,000. The $214,000 from my house, around $140,000 billed to the state for care he did not provide while he was clocked in at a distribution center. The rest was everything I'd earned in 39 years and everything the government sent me after, 7.5 years of it, minus the $200 a month he handed me in an envelope on the first, minus my food. He'd spent it. Cars, a base boat, a bathroom, an above-ground pool, and about $80,000 I don't think anybody will ever fully account for. Not $1 of it was hidden. He never hid anything, because it never crossed his mind that anyone would look. Grady pled guilty in June, theft from an elderly person, and Medicaid fraud, 4 years, and restitution he will be paying until he is an old man himself, and he lost the license he needed for the work he actually did for a living. They asked me to speak at the sentencing. I said yes, and then I stood up in that courtroom with a piece of paper in my hand that I had written 11 times, and I looked at the back of my son's head and I put the paper in my pocket, and I said, "Your Honor, I've got no speech. This boy's mother is dead. I raised him wrong." I took the wrench out of his hand every time, and I made a man who thinks a hard thing is something that happens to someone else. I'm not asking you to go easy. I'm asking you to understand that I'm the one who's got to live in the house I built. Then I sat down. Grady turned around. First time he'd looked at me since March. He was crying. He said, "Dad." Just that. And they took him out. I don't know what I feel. I want to give you something clean here, and I can't. Some mornings I'm the man who stood in the rain, and some mornings I'm a father whose boy is in Chillicothe, and both of those men live in my body, and they do not speak to each other. Delia I'll tell you about because it matters. She wasn't charged. She could have been. She knew, and she said nothing, and the prosecutor sat with me and asked me what I wanted, and I said, that woman has to raise Winnie. And I said, I have spent 8 years being the reason nobody in that house had to look at anything, and I am not going to spend the rest of it being the reason that child has one parent. She cooperated, fully. She'd kept things. There was a bag of fertilizer in the garage with a certified letter under it, and Delia is the one who told them where. She and I are not friends. We won't be. I eat dinner at that table twice a week now, at the head of it, and it is the most uncomfortable meal in the state of Ohio, and I would not trade it because Winnie sits on my left. The house was sold. My money came back to me. Not all of it, it never is, but enough. I bought a small place on Kenwick Drive, 4 doors down, 1 story, 2 bedrooms, a garage I've got a bench in. I want to tell you about the first night because I did not expect it and it embarrassed me. I got the key from the title company at 4 in the afternoon, and I stood in the front hall of an empty house that belonged to me. No furniture, nothing. And I went into every room and turned on every light, and then I went out the front door and came back in the front door, and then I did it again. Then I sat down on the floor of the living room, 74 years old, and I cried like I have not cried since Estelle went down in that kitchen. Not because of what he did, because I could walk through my own front hall and nobody was going to pause the television. That's what he took. Not the money. Anybody can survive losing money. He took the front hall. There's something else. In the drawer of my nightstand, in a rubber band, are 89 empty envelopes. Every first of the month for 7.5 years, my son put $200 on my dresser in a white envelope, and I said thank you, and I spent the money and I kept the envelope. I don't know why. I never once thought about it. I just put it in the drawer, 89 of them. My lawyer wanted them. She said a jury would understand 89 envelopes faster than they'd understand a spreadsheet. And she was right, and it never got to a jury anyway. I have them back now, I don't look at them, but I'm not going to throw them out either, because a man ought to keep one honest record of exactly how long he was willing to say thank you. Otis Rawlings is directly across the street. We wave. Twice a month, on Saturdays, I go over and we don't talk about it, and he beats me at cribbage. Winnie walks down after school. She's got a key. It's on a green cord around her neck, and she wears it outside her shirt, on purpose where anybody can see it. The soldering kit is on the workbench in the garage. She's tinned about 40 wires. She's got a burn on the pad of her right thumb the size of a grain of rice, and she is unbelievably proud of it, and I did not stop her getting it. And every Sunday she and I have supper at my table, in the dining room, in the middle of the house, front door. I'm going to say one hard thing, and then I'll let you go. I have been asked, a lot, by well-meaning people, whether I feel like I got revenge. And I understand the question. I've watched the same shows you have. Everybody wants the moment where the old man stands up and something in his hand ruins somebody. There wasn't one. I never had anything in my hand. Everything that happened to my son was already lying there, finished, in a spreadsheet, weeks before that suitcase went out on the step. He was already caught. The investigator was already in her car. The only thing left undecided in the whole world that afternoon was whether I would get in the van and keep saying, "It's fine. It's fine, don't make a fuss," and let him bury me under a chart with my name on it. I didn't do anything. I just stopped disappearing. That's what it was. 8 years of a man agreeing, in small increments, to be less and less there. The mail, the key, the car, the side door, the pausing of the television, until it seemed perfectly natural to everyone, including me, that I should be put outside in the rain with my suitcase. Nobody makes you vanish in one afternoon. They ask you to be a little smaller, and you say yes, because you love them, and because it's easier, and because it's raining and you don't want to fight. And then one day there's a van. So here's what I've got, from an old man who fixed machines for a living and let his own life seize up for 8 years. The room getting smaller is the emergency, not the van. The van is just the last thing. If somebody has your mail, that's not convenience. If you thank a person every month for handing you your own money, hear yourself say it. If you go around the outside of a house you paid for so nobody has to pause the television, that is not peace. You are not keeping the peace. You are teaching somebody, patiently, one small surrender at a time, that there is no bottom. And you will not know where the bottom is until you are standing on it, wet, in your socks, watching your granddaughter's hands get pulled off your arm. So answer the phone. That's all I did. I want to leave you with one more thing, and then a question. 2 weeks ago, Winnie asked me about the rain. I'd been dreading it for 4 months. I sat down across from her at my kitchen table, and I decided I was not going to lie to that child again as long as I lived. I said, "Your daddy did something wrong. He took money that was mine for a long time, and when he found out he was going to have to answer for it, he tried to send me away so I couldn't be asked about it." And she thought about that for a while, and she said, "Is that why he wouldn't let me hold your hand?" And I said, "Yes." And my granddaughter said, "But I did anyway." She did. She ran out into the rain in her socks, and she took hold of me with both hands. And she was 8, and she weighed 60 pounds, and she was the only living soul in that entire county who did the right thing without stopping to think about what it would cost her. I'll die remembering that, not the suitcase, not the phone. 2 small hands in the rain. She has a father who is going to come home in a few years to a daughter who saw exactly what he was and ran the other way, toward the man in the rain. And that's a hard thing for him, and it is going to be the making of her. So here's my question, and I read every one. I mean that. My granddaughter reads them to me on Sundays. Is your room getting smaller? I don't mean the van. Nobody's coming with the van. I mean the mail, and the key, and the sigh. I mean the thing you decided last week not to make a fuss about. Somebody watching this is at the very beginning of what took me 8 years, and if that's you, put it in the comments. Say it out loud where somebody can see it, because I never did, not one time in 8 years, to a single human being. And if this reached you, then subscribe, because I meant what I said at the top. I looked for a story like mine for a long time, and there wasn't one. Now there is. Let it find the next man on the porch. The next time somebody asks you to be a little smaller so nobody has to pause the television, don't. Answer the phone.